Welcome to the Pacesetter Pod, where we explore and reveal the perspectives, insights, and approaches to deliver great results and growth in your agribusiness through better execution. Here's your host, the Integration Pacesetter, Joe Mosier.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Pacesetter Pod. I'm your host, Joe Mosier. I really appreciate you choosing to spend your time with us today. Today, I'm going to be sitting down with Erin, Mies, and Kristen Ireland, and they are the co-founders of PeopleSpark Consulting. PeopleSpark was a company I was not familiar with until recently when we were connected through a mutual acquaintance. But they are an HR consultancy that focuses on executing strategy through people, through better process, structure, culture, goal setting, etc. And they work exclusively along the ag supply chain and with ag businesses. So highly relevant, highly familiar, and very complementary to a lot of the discussions that we have on this show every week. In this conversation with Erin and Kristen, we're going to talk about the way that they go about creating the clarity in your strategy that you need to produce the behaviors needed to get the results that you want. So really driving clarity in strategy. They're going to talk about how do you connect strategy and execution, topic I'm very passionate about, but how do you make that connection through people and people processes. They're going to share their process for diagnosing where breakdowns are occurring in the organization. Is it process? Is it structure? Is it rewards? Is it skills and behaviors, etc.? And how they apply the people and strategy roadmap to help their ag clients move in the right direction and get better results over the long term. They'll talk about the role of power in decisions, which is an underappreciated aspect of organizational design. And so how do you move your understanding and move the discussions beyond reassigning people, moving pieces on the board, creating a new org chart, and actually thinking about how do you want decision-making to occur in the organization, and then how do you enable that through structure. And finally, one of the things that I really love their insights on is the two butts, one seat problem, and really their point of view around how and where and what way you should use or avoid the idea of co-roles. Two people sitting in one position, how you properly delineate responsibilities, reporting lines, decisions, etc. And so where that can work and where it can't. Great conversation with Erin and Kristen. Let's get over to the interview. Erin and Kristen, so good to see you guys today. Thanks for making the time and welcome to the Pacesetter Pod.
Thanks for having us.
We're excited to be here.
Indeed. I love the overlap of the work that we all do, the clients that we serve, and the opportunity to bring more and differentiated value to ag supply chain companies. And in that vein, maybe we should just start off by having you guys talk a little bit about PeopleSpark, who you are, what you guys do, and who you serve.
Wonderful. Well, yes. So Erin and I co-founded PeopleSpark Consulting back in 2018. We work primarily with businesses within agriculture. So a lot of our clients are co-ops, feed mills, feed retailers, ag retailers. And we work a lot on business and HR strategy. So how companies can look at their organization and make sure everybody is pulling in the same direction for the business to be successful.
Beautifully simple. Well articulated. Well, one of the things when we met earlier this year and had a chance to get to know each other, one of the things I thought was really interesting was the people and strategy roadmap. And I had quipped at the time that everybody has a roadmap, right? There's a product roadmap, there's a strategic roadmap, et cetera. But you guys actually do have a roadmap that does help create that connective tissue between strategy execution via people. And so I'd be, love to hear you guys talk a little bit about the people strategy roadmap, what it is, how you developed it and put it together, and how you put it to use with your clients.
Absolutely. So with our people and strategy roadmap, this is typically one of the first exercises that we go through with their organization with the intent of understanding where are they trying to go as a business. So in their goals and their objectives, their shorter term, as well as some of their longer term just outcomes that they're going after. And with that gives us an opportunity then to also dig into what current people practices, what current people processes does the organization have in place? And more than a yes or no, I have this, looking more specifically at what results is it creating? So we might have as an example, we might see an organization that has a performance review process. That said, it might not be driving the results that they're intending for it to drive within the organization. So if I backed up a little bit, when we first started the business and started with this diagnostic, we were looking primarily just at HR practices and just at HR processes. And what we found over the last several years is how frequently we were encountering organizations that didn't have clear, specific goals, business goals for the organization. And without that, for us, it doesn't really matter what HR processes or practices or people practices we put into place if we're not clear on those objectives from the beginning. So the people and strategy roadmap really evolved as a tool to connect. I love their term connective tissue of connecting these two things that we know are that they work in conjunction with one another. And yet sometimes we look at them as just business or just people. And so our aim is to make sure that the things that you do have in place or that you're wanting to put in place are going to impact and create the results that are connected to the business outcomes you're looking for.
Something that I see with some of our clients is that oftentimes, well, in nearly every case, they have a strategy, right? Or at least there's a generally understood premise that there's a strategy in place, but sometimes it's not well articulated enough. Is it fair to say that the people and strategy roadmap exercise and the process you take them through, it better flushes out the strategy in and of itself, not just articulating how it ties to people, but how it ties to driving value for the organization overall? Or do you need to have that well-articulated strategy already in place for the people strategy roadmap to really kind of get traction and show its value?
So what we're looking for in the people and strategy roadmap is how well defined is that strategy. So what we'll hear frequently are things like improve our local earnings or make money. It could be very vague objectives like that. And not only are we talking with the GM or the CEO, we're also wanting to understand what are key stakeholders within the organization, what is their interpretation of that strategy as well. So beyond what we hear from that CEO or general manager, we want to make sure that others within the organization, as it moves, it's consistent. And that's another component that as we're having stakeholder interviews that we're asking for to be able to clarify that. Some of that strategy work comes later after the diagnostic if what we're finding is that strategy is not as clear as it could be.
And when we think about whether or not a strategy is clear, we think about it in terms of, is it clear enough to drive the behavior that you need to see in your teams? So when we talk about our strategy is to make more money than we did last year, to serve our customers, it's not specific enough to drive a behavior. So is the strategy clear enough to drive the behavior that you want to see? And we see that tie into some of the HR strategy then once we have the business strategy to tie into that HR strategy and the people practices. What we have found with a lot of businesses is they'll talk about strategy. As Erin said, they see strategy and business separate from HR, that the people who are really successful are seeing that connection point. And so many times people don't see that connection. They look at HR as the must do, need to do, compliance focus, separate from business. One of the terms that we use are businesses looking at HR playing to win. And playing to win is, are we making sure that all of our people, our processes, our practices are pulling to that overall strategy or goal, or are we playing not to lose? And playing not to lose in human resources is we're focused on our compliance. So we want to make sure that everybody is pulling in the right direction, that you're really leveraging your people and your practices to meet your goals.
Well, I think even potentially more destructive is when you have your strategy, you have your ways you're going about executing, and then you're retrofitting the people compliance aspects back on top of it after the fact, right? And it becomes then very intrusive. It's inconsistent. It's not even concurrent work. It's actually conflicting work. And I remember earlier in my career talking about how do you adjust a business to be a business that operates with safety in mind? And we use the analogy of, you don't spend all quarter or all year with your accounting team booking entries, making journal entries, making adjustments, writing off bad debt, et cetera. And at the end of the year, go back and make sure that every line item was GAAP compliant. You put systems in place to ensure GAAP compliance throughout the year. So compliance with generally accepted accounting principles became the way you ran the business. And that's what we had to do from a safety perspective too.
Mm-hmm.
We had the right programs, we had the right training, we had the right coaching, we had the right administrative and engineering controls in place to keep our people safe. And it sounds like that's kind of the same premise here, is you actually want to have it hard baked into just the way you're going about executing strategy, not saying, okay, here's the plan, here's how we do, here's how our CapEx is deployed, here's how we have our assets, here's how we have all of our systems running. Oh yeah, now let's figure out how we make our people fit into that.
Exactly.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. So something I know we've talked a lot about, and something that I feel very passionate about, my passion exceeds my competence, in full disclosure, is just generally org design. And I'm guessing that you all end up doing quite a bit of org design work in your service to clients. A couple of thoughts that I have when I think about org design is oftentimes leadership teams are really drawn towards the idea of an organizational restructure or revisiting the organization. And this happens a lot in the work that we do as part of mergers and acquisitions, right? Of course, you have to address that when you bring two companies together. But even when things aren't going well, right? When there's a problem to be solved and you start thinking about, well, it's the team's not performing the way we want, perhaps we're not properly structured. And when we start doing work with our clients, I find that they love the task, but they hate the work. Right? You just want to kind of get to the step of moving pieces around because it feels strategic, right? It feels productive. You're moving pieces around on the board. It gives a false sense of clarity for what the future is going to look like. It gives a false sense of progress. We're moving things forward, but you're really just creating another, PowerPoint slide. It gives a false sense of impact because the people in that room making those decisions, they feel, they really feel like they've put their fingerprints on something. And then kind of the irony of it is everyone thinks they're playing chess. In fact, they're probably playing checkers, but the ultimate outcome is going to be everyone was actually playing Connect Four because the bottom's going to fall out and you're going to start all over again, right? So it's kind of this interesting sort of cycle I see companies go through. So with all that said, back to my original premise, do you all get involved in your design work a lot? And if so, do you see a lot of problems and challenges with conventional org design, and how do you guys approach that challenge?
Yes. So that people and strategy roadmap that we were speaking about a little bit earlier, as that has evolved, we have incorporated more org design concepts into it. And so one of our favorite models to use is the J. Galbraith STAR model. So STAR doesn't stand for anything. It just means a star. It's a 5-point star. And it's intuitive. There's plenty of detailed information. You can make it incredibly complex if you wanted to, but truly it can be very intuitive. It looks at 5 key points. The first being strategy, structure, processes, rewards, and people. What I love about it in the simplicity is that if any one of these points on the star are misaligned, you're going to feel it. You're going to feel it in some sort of symptom. For instance, if the strategy is unclear, you're going to have and see as a symptom employees within your organization trying to do what they believe is the right thing to do, and people are going in all different directions. If, for instance, structure, I won't go through all 5 of them, but if for instance, structure is misaligned, you will have people thinking, well, I didn't think that was my job, or I thought that was his, or leaders saying, we want our supervisors making more decisions at their level, and yet we're not giving them the decision making to be able to do that. And so the concepts behind that Galbraith STAR model have really been woven into our people and strategy roadmap to help uncover where those symptoms might be so that we can address them with clients. And you are spot on, because this org design work, especially when we get into strategy and structure, those 2 key areas where we generally start, those tend to take the longest to guide clients through, because in many instances, we're trying to help hold our clients accountable for getting specific on those goals and objectives, and then connect their structure to be able to support those objectives they've just said are important. And that doesn't mean kind of making sure that I've got Bob and that I've got Tim all in their boxes. It means that I have the right roles to be able to support the strategy. And that's where it starts to feel a little bit riskier in terms of, oh man, what do I need? Because now this feels a little bit more like I might have to make some changes or make some adjustments. Kristen, what would you add?
Well, I was just thinking about, you asked if we do this a lot in the work that we do. I would say that this is something that we end up doing with almost every client. I was just on a call with a client today where we were having this same discussion. They were actually really good about having their strategy in place and what success looked like. When they started to move to then structure, it all of a sudden goes from strategy to task. And they start to think about, okay, this is the task that needs to get done. And to your point, that's where they start moving the tasks around into different boxes. So it's like, yeah, we talked about strategy. Now let's talk about the tasks that need to be done. Where our goal is, all right, let's talk about your strategy. What does success look like? And then what does success look like? What roles do you need to have in place to hit that success? And for the roles that are in place, what does success look like for them to drive forward that will pull into the overall business success? That's not just moving tasks around a sheet. And this client that we were working with had they had the most detailed accountability chart that I have seen in a while. I loved it. It was great. It's task focused, so it feels very disconnected from what they had identified as their strategy. So we went through it, great information to use. We went through it a different way to look at what are the metrics and the success factors for each of those different roles. And when I asked, how did this feel? They said, this is a very different process because it keeps us looking at where we're going moving forward. And then it starts to lean through. So we make sure that the structure, including the power and decisions. So for this morning, we were talking about who provides work direction, who is a supervisor, and who provides communication, to really understand where those decisions are being held. Is this your supervisor? Is it somebody who's providing work direction? Or is it somebody who is providing you important information for you to have? And then you can follow through the remainder of the star. But that to me is the biggest impact. And even, you talked about that in terms of mergers and acquisitions. We hear about this and see this quite a bit of two organizations come together. A lot of times what we hear, and we heard this from a previous client, of economies of scale. This is going to give us great economies of scale. And when we were going through the people and strategy roadmap with one of the leaders, his comment was, I wish I knew that it wasn't just about being bigger, because they made the assumption that if they merged, they would become bigger and that would ultimately make them more successful. And he said there's a lot more that we missed in that opportunity because they didn't really look at. So when you go back and you're talking to people who are going through mergers and acquisitions of, what is the goal? Why are you looking to merge? What is the strategy in coming together in that merger? So that as we're moving into the structure perspective, we're really able to realize that strategy rather than you have a grain manager, I have a grain manager. Where are they going to fit together? Who should go into that role? How do we differentiate those, where it becomes more about the task when goal of the merger was something different?
Poorly executed mergers and acquisitions destroy more value than they create. They can set your company back years. To defend your firm's position in the marketplace, you need access to the leading practices that unlock the greater potential of your people, processes, and systems. If you are undertaking a company transformation or pursuing an acquisition as a vehicle to grow, set up a call with Joe by visiting www.moshercg.com.
Kristen, that's really well said. And one of the things I'm thinking about here is just the diagnostic nature of the people and strategy roadmap. And first and foremost, helping to validate is the source of misalignment actually born of the structure, or is it something else? Because as you said, organizational alignment is a pretty complex machine, right? It's strategy, it's process, it's rewards, it's people, it's structure. You could add in systems, you could add in cultures, a lot of other things that probably, conceivably could be added, or maybe they're baked in elsewhere. So knowing first and foremost if structure is actually the problem to be solved is really important. The other thing that really struck me is, you guys are talking about where, not just where tasks happen, but where decisions are made, right? Where the power resides. And in the work that we've done with our clients, we talk about this often in terms of the operating model, right? So before we even get to what is the structure, we take the strategy and we say, okay, well, how is it that you all want to operate? Are you looking for a highly distributed decision-making model, or highly centralized or hierarchical? Are you looking at effort-based performance or results-based performance, right? Is it how much time someone spends in their seat, or is it how many sales they actually book, right? How is that going to be viewed and handled within the organization? Are you oriented to operate according to client categories, customer categories, or is it by product? Or is it by region, right? There's all these different ways you can organize it. And we do that work up front from an operating model standpoint that is divorced initially from the positions and the roles, because it's so easy to jump into what roles do we need. And the other thing one of the reasons that we do it, this is born more of experience than a rigorous academic understanding of the work, is we need to do everything we can to untether leadership from the organization they have today. Because so often, it becomes about, well, we know we have 50 employees now, so let's figure out how we organize this organization around 50 employees. And that might be a financial necessity in the near term, but if you hamstring yourself and you only think about the organization within those constraints, you're really going to shortchange the future. And so we try to get them to say, okay, what's the operating model? How do you want to operate? And to your point, what is the work that needs to be done in order for that to happen? Now let's start talking about what is an organization built around those sort of core tenets look like. It sounds like that's some of the same work you're getting into within the people and strategy roadmap.
Yeah, that's honestly some of, I think, the things that are most exciting in the work is being able to think about where are we trying to go? And right, what I share with clients when we go through people and strategy roadmap, and especially when we're working on org design and structure, is just because we're putting together a structure for how you want this to look 3 years from now doesn't mean that this is how it's going to perfectly evolve. You are going to have people resign, go to another organization, move back home to family, and things are not going to happen in the order that we're talking about. What we're doing in this, though, is helping you plan out what moves you can make along the way so that when those openings do happen, whether they were planned or not, you understand some of the options available to you that are going to still keep you on track towards that strategy that you've deemed is important for your business.
How do you guys, in your work with clients, then keep those plans that you say it's going to be iterative, it's a long-term objective, you're going to grow into it, you can opportunistically drive change when someone retires, etc. How do you keep that front and center in people's minds? Because it's so easy when you're running a business to say, yeah, I get it. Okay, this is iterative. We've designed the future. It might take us 5 years to get there. And then 6 months later, when that unexpected turnover happens, that actually creates opportunity. How do you make sure they remember to go back and think about that strategy roadmap as opposed to just scrambling to fill the role and frankly losing the opportunity to move the organization forward? Because that's a very easy trap to fall into when you're running a business in the middle of planting season or at harvest or whatever it might be.
Yeah. So fortunately for our clients, most of the work that we're doing, so I mentioned that this strategy and structure work tends to take the longest. So we're often working on it for a few months with them. And so as those moves come up, we're not reaching as far back into the old files as maybe we otherwise would need to. But then in general, as we're working through other project work with them, we're staying connected on what is happening in the business, and we'll come back to those. And one of my favorite things to hear is, oh, wow, I forgot we said that that's what we wanted to do. Oh, I guess this opens that up over here. And it's you've already done the work. Now we get to execute on it. And it also can make things feel a lot less emotional and a lot less personal, especially when you may have lost a key employee, or maybe you lost somebody or are losing somebody that you didn't expect to lose. So it takes some of that emotion out. And one of our clients that we did this work with, they said, I don't feel like my hair is on fire all the time, because I know that we have a plan and that we're just going to keep taking the next step towards that.
And it is fun. So truly, separate client, just talk with them today. I'm not making that up. Just had these conversations today. We went through strategy and structure discussions probably a year and a half, 2 years ago. And at the point where we went through those structure conversations, we did here's current state of your organization. Here is kind of the immediate changes we want to make to formalize some of the things that they had talked about based on their structure. Here is what can happen in 2 to 3 years. As we're talking to this client today, he's talking through some of the changes they've made. I pulled up the org chart that we put together 2 to 3 years ago, and I was like, so this is where we're at? He had come to, because we had spent so much time investing it, that had been forefront of his mind. So truly, the decisions that he had made, we came back to, here's what you could do in 2 to 3 years. That's where he is today. And we had all of that built. So now as he goes forward to fill those positions, that's already in place. So I said, as you communicate to your staff even that this feels like a change, this change was grounded in the discussions we had back here. So this isn't something coming up out of the blue. This is the next right step. So when you talk about implementing changes, it makes it easier for people to go along with those changes because they see where you're heading, and this feels like the next right thing to do. But it was so fun to pull it up, and he's like, yeah, that's exactly what we're doing. Yay!
Especially fun when it's right. No, that's great. And I think what it does, it highlights too, the theme that's coming out here is that org design. And this discussion wasn't meant to be exclusively about org design, but we're spending a lot of time there, and that's okay. It's not episodic. It feels episodic, right? It feels like we're going to do this assessment. We did their project strategy roadmap. We have severe structure deficiency, or whatever the diagnostic would say. We're going to fix this problem. We make these changes. Okay, we're done. That's not the case. There are, like you said, Kristen, there's those immediate changes that will be made that make sense, that are necessary, that you can make on day whatever. But there is then that longer term view, which is, again, it's just reflective of strategy. Your strategy is never done. Your plan might be done, but by the time you get to the end of the plan, you're probably already starting to think about, well, what's next for the business, right?
Well, and we've talked a lot about strategy and structure. It flows to so many different ways. We worked with one client who really had a lot of, these are two separate clients that I'm going to talk about, a lot of overtime, and they were spending a lot of money on overtime. So we talked about getting to that power in decisions. Who is making the decision about whether or not we're spending that money on overtime? And do they have the information to make that decision? So the decision was being made by somebody who didn't have access to the information to know, when is this person going on overtime? When are they hitting those overtime hours? How much are these employees paid versus these employees paid? So that tells us that there is next part of the star, there is a process gap, that there wasn't the information flow that this person needed to be able to make that decision appropriately to align with where the business wanted to go. We've had other cases, incentives and rewards, that we will see that a business is incentivizing behavior or task, and it's going against and driving behaviors that conflict with where you want to go in your strategy. So we will find that misalignment throughout the star. It usually starts in strategy and structure, because if we don't know where we're going, it's hard to build anything off of that. Once we know that, we can see where that misalignment is coming through the rest of the design.
Well, we have our next show topic then is the potential but destructive capacity of incentives, which is a topic that I love. But before we get to the end here today, there's something I wanted to bring up because it's in the news right now within agribusiness. And so bear with me for a brief preamble here, but in mid-April, following, we know that at this time as we record in spring of 24, Bunge and Viterra have announced a intention to merge, which is now going through the regulatory reviews in both the U.S. and in Canada. But in mid-April, Bunge announced what the new leadership team that would be stood up following the merger would look like. Again, it's expected to close sometime middle of this year, but we'll see. And the announcement included naming Bunge's existing CEO and CFO to those same positions overseeing the newly combined entity. But they also had a decision to name two co-COOs or two co-chief operating officers, one being Viterra's current CEO and the other being Bunge's current president of agribusiness. And so this, there's not a lot of inside baseball here, but this could very well be a transitional move, right? If one of those individuals is eventually going to be leaving the organization, this is a great way to sort of navigate that over the short term, but that wasn't part of the announcement. In fact, according to World Grain, an article on this, they said the co-CEOs will, quote, jointly oversee the commercial activities of the future combined organization, which includes commodity value chains, country regional structures, centers of expertise, and industrial and operations and safety. And then it further went on, and Bunge's CEO, Greg Heckman, said, creating the co-COO positions ensures we have the right level of leadership, focus on the multiple commercial and operational streams so that we identify the strengths of our current organization and leverage them globally as we come together as one Bunge. So I'd be very curious to hear from the two of you how you feel generally about this type of arrangement. Now, we're obviously not making commentary on Bunge or Viterra. We're not opining on the wisdom or peril of this decision that they've made. But, in my experience, this type of dual accountability can work, but there needs to be a very short shelf life for the approach and a pretty firm timetable for when we're going to create more clarity, just both for those incumbents in the roles as well as the organizations that they lead. This is, it's not a novel innovation to have two people in one seat, but in my experience, it doesn't work over the long term. So I have an opportunity with the two of you here. How do you address when clients arrive at the idea of, well, why don't we just put both Bob and Tim in that role?
Right.
What's the worst that could happen?
So I say this with the understanding that Kristen and I co-own our business, right? So I want to just put that out there right now. I recognize that. And I can come back to that in a little bit to explain how we have very clearly outlined certain responsibilities so that we can maintain a good, effective partnership.
Erin, I appreciate that. It's okay. We're all consultants and the cobbler's kids have no shoes, right? So it's fine.
So when we get into structure discussions and we're talking about who makes the decisions within the business, one way that I have found gets their attention is the rule of having one butt to one seat. And that way we know that the accountability, the responsibility of that role, of this role in particular, has one person responsible for it. And the reason for that, and you probably have had these experiences in your career, I know I've had plenty of them in mine too, is that when we start to have more than one person in the same role without very clearly outlining the distinctions between those roles or the lines of responsibility, then it can very quickly deteriorate either into, well, that's their problem. You can see infighting within an organization even, and it can lead to confusion. So my bigger concern is more about those who report to them. From whom are they taking direction? And this is a talking point where we get into with clients frequently of, okay, maybe you do have more than one person in this role. When this person is giving direction and somebody else is giving a different direction, who makes the ultimate call? And if we don't have an answer to that, then we need to rewind a little bit more to gain clarity in it. Because otherwise, that confusion leads to all kinds of other symptoms with our employees, again, who are just trying to do the right thing.
I want to add to that. Really, it's important about making those distinctions. So I have experience, Erin and I actually met working for a large agricultural cooperative and saw that in place where there were two COOs. There were distinctions between which parts of the business does each COO, which are they responsible for? So they each had their own set of metrics, what success looked like, similar role, but they were able to distinguish who was responsible for what. And that distinction, that clarity, to use the word, Joe, that you used earlier, that clarity made that work, made that effective, because each had their own area of responsibility, even though they shared the title, shared the seat.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. The torpedo that's sometimes in the water with that is if it's clearly delineated which parts of the business they oversee, which solves for the who makes the decision problem.
Yes.
Right? That you guys are both talking about here. You still need to have a standard way the work gets done. So I think about if you have two GMs, and let's say that one's on the west of the Mississippi and one's on the east of the Mississippi. And in the west, we're going to organize our sales teams to go after by county. Right? We're going to call on farmers according to the county where they reside. But east of the Mississippi, we're going to call on farmers based on the size of their operations. We've got folks that focus on large farmers versus small farmers. That's fine. If the way, however, you contract grain, set discounts on those origination contracts, price your risk management products and solutions, and you have a completely different commercial strategy from a process standpoint behind it, then I think you actually do still have a problem, even with that clarity of oversight. And so it's, and maybe that's actually a different challenge than this two butts, one seat problem. But it's a multi-variable challenge when these kinds of things happen. And so I'm generally just not a fan over the long term, though it sounds like from your experiences, in certain cases with certain level of clarity, they can work quite well.
Well, and what I heard in even the situation that you described it, to me, I would bring that back to strategy. What is the strategy of the organization? And is that structure or how each of those operate in alignment with the strategy? To me, that question is a strategy question.
Very well said. Well, we're running out of time. Again, I just very much appreciate the fact that I came to know both of you and came to know of People Spark. We're all serving the same profile of clients along the ag value chain. You all do incredibly important work that supports them being successful, but also even more importantly, supports the growth of those organizations, which then just creates more jobs, more opportunities, and more support for rural communities across the United States. And so I appreciate and thank you for focusing so much in that particular niche. And I will certainly include links to People Spark and your contact information in the show notes. But let me just close by saying thank you very much again for taking time to be part of the Pacesetter Pod.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
And thank you, as always, to our listeners for tuning in. A quick reminder before we go to like and subscribe to the Pacesetter Pod wherever you get your podcasts. And please consider leaving us a review, as that is the best way you can support the show and make sure that others that would benefit from this content know about us. And to continue the conversation, you can connect with me, Joe Mosier, on LinkedIn, or set up a call by visiting Mosier Consulting Group online at mosiercg.com. Thank you for listening, and have a safe day.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.